Nice. As I was saying, we have been working also with composting equipment and creating new equipments that are more sustainable and that are basically better for the environment, but we'll get there. I also was part of the co-creation of Lisbon's summer composting school last year, which we had over 1,000 people subscribing to the free activity. It was like a huge boom, and we could finally talk about apartment composting for many, many people. Well, enough about me. Mudatuga is then a startup with the mission to transform regular people into composting ninjas. And some people find this amusing, but actually, what I love about our mission is that we are not only teaching composting and making composting something that is like a boring obligation that people have to follow, but actually we are teaching people not only how to compost, but also how to act, how to become change makers themselves. So how can we empower our customers or our community to become agents of change themselves? How can they also teach others how to compost? So the idea is to create a movement and to create the most decentralized way of spreading the word of composting. So composting ninjas can not only teach composting to other people, but they can actually do composting in any kind of environment. It doesn't matter if it's a garden, if it's an apartment, if you have a terrace or not. I'm pretty confident that all of our composting ninjas can do it anyway. Well, we started in Portugal, and the reason why we started working here is that I was very much frustrated about the way Portugal was treating their waste. So basically in 2020, we had over 60% of our urban solid waste going to landfills. And nowadays we have 33 active landfills in Portugal. Another very bad news for our country is that we are also receiving waste from other countries to be landfilled in here. That means we have something really, really severe to sort for the next years, because as you know, there are new European legislations saying that we have to stop using so much our landfills, but on the other hand, Portugal is getting waste from other countries. And if you ask yourself, why is Portugal doing that? One of the reasons is that it's really cheap to put a ton of waste into the landfill here. It's around 22 euros. And if you go to any other European country, they charge around like 100 to even 150 euros per ton of waste. So as you can see, it's also a matter of money, right? So it's really cheap to put waste into landfills here. So this is something we have been advocating about. And I really believe that with our Composting Ninjas army, we'll get there and actually make the government increase the landfill deposition rates. Another point is that not only the waste in the landfill creates and generates a lot of CO2 and CO2 equivalent emissions, we also have the issues of transportation and treatment of waste. All of this cycle generates a lot of pollution, right? So we have many things here to consider. And also we had, well, this is also because of the pandemics, right? But in 2020, less than 9% of urban solid waste was recycled. And here we are not only talking about bio-waste, we are also talking about plastic, metal, paper, right? So we have a lot of waste that is directly going to landfills. Of course, during the pandemics, this is harder because like we were uncertain in 2020 whether we could be contaminating more people when we were recycling or not. But before the pandemics, this number was around 12 to 13%. So as you can see, having the infrastructure is not enough. So there is a huge behavior issue behind waste management in Portugal, because people actually have the recycling collection points, but they are not going there. They are not separating their waste at home correctly. So we have to start changing people's behaviors before actually investing thousands of millions of euros in infrastructure, because actually if people don't separate their waste, the infrastructure becomes obsolete, right? So this is one of the things Mudatuga really believes in, and this is why our mission is not actually focused so much in infrastructure. The mission of the company is pretty much focused on behavior and training. So far, we have educated over 1,000 people. This is, for me, a huge milestone, because we are very small and very recent startup, and also because I really feel like environmental education is not always as praised as it could be. We also have a big community of composting ninjas. We have like over 6,000 people in our social media getting free content, free ebooks, free sessions like this one. But we also work with companies, we also work with municipalities, we also work with universities and schools. So we offer like more informal trainings like this one, but we also offer training for technicians. When we do our trainings, we not only talk about Bokashi composting as we're doing right now, but we also talk about garden composting, community composting, and Takakura composting, and worm farms. So there are like lots of ways to compost, and I'll get there in a few slides. But what we are trying to do here is that we believe that as much information people have, the more informed is their decision. So they are not doing one or other kind of composting because they lack information. They are actually doing a very conscious choice. We also have prototyped compost bin made from natural materials that for us is very special. Thanks to this project that we have been developing for the past year, we had very good recognition and feedback. We won Climate Launchpad in the European national and European finals. And then we went to the global finals, and we got into the Climate Accelerator from Climate Kick. So we are getting a lot of help, which is great, to launch our compost bin. And hopefully by the end of the summer, we will have our Kickstarter, and anyone in Europe will be able to acquire compost bins that are not made of plastic and that are regenerative, and they're really, really thinking about supply chains and trying to make things differently, right? We don't really believe that we can reverse completely the climate crisis unless we completely change the way we manufacture goods. Also, I just wanted to showcase, we had the honor of being chosen by the World Economic Forum Uplink platform, which is an innovation platform, as one of 9 youth-led initiatives fighting climate change around the world. So this is really cool, and we are super happy to be here talking about our company and also teaching you how you can actually compost in an apartment. So why should you be caring about composting, right? As I said, in Portugal, we still have a lot of urban waste being sent to landfills, but also if you live in Europe, there's a huge chance you have already heard about the new European directive. So since 2018, Europe has been pressuring their member states to start creating their own legislations around bio-waste segregation, the source, but also composting, or at least some kind of different treatment, right? So this is not a legislation that is going to obligate countries to compost necessarily, but actually to give or to create value to bio-waste, okay? And also when you compost, you're contributing directly to 3 of UN's Sustainable Development Goals, namely sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption, production, and climate action, of course. Many people forget that waste is also a big factor when it comes to CO2 and CO2 equivalent emissions. Okay, so getting into the workshop, enough of Mudatuga and background information. So Mudatuga works with 4 different composting methods. So one of them is hot compost, which I think everyone has heard about. If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat, or you can even unmute yourselves and just interrupt me. So there's a line there to symbolize that actually hot compost is the only kind of compost that you really have to do in a garden. So you need to be outside, okay? You cannot do this in an apartment. But then there are 3 other methods of composting that you can actually do in an apartment. And for us, this is really our focus. Why? Well, because most people tell me I'm not going to compost because I live in an apartment and the government is not really giving me any options. And Mudatuga is all about creating change at the individual level. So I tell them, actually, you're wrong. You have 3 options for composting at your own place. So I'm not talking about all of the methods. Today, I'm only focusing on Bokashi because it's really magical. And I think it's pretty much adaptable to any context. So most of you must know worm farms. Takakura and Bokashi are a little bit less known, but I'm confident that you love learning about Bokashi. So Bokashi method, you're going to see that it's a great way to compose things in an apartment. So this small table here is just to give you an idea that there are lots of composting myths out there. And one of the myths is that we cannot compost meat and dairy, for example. But with the right method and the right scale and equipment, you can basically compost anything. I'm not going to focus here on other composting methods. If you want to screenshot this, feel free to do so. But I'm only focusing here on the Bokashi line. So as you can see, you can compost everything, including meat and dairy, and including oranges and lemons and things that like pineapples that people normally worry about. The only thing I don't recommend you to compost is garden waste inside the Bokashi bin. And this is not because you can't, it's just that because the Bokashi bin is so small that I don't think it's worth it. I think you can do it differently, and you understand it by the end of this workshop, what you can actually do with your garden waste in the case that you live in a house and you want to have Bokashi, even though you have a garden, okay? So we'll get there. Okay, so as I was saying, with the right method, you can compost anything, but also it's not only about what you can compost, but about the space you have available in your apartment or in your house, right? So when it comes to Bokashi composting, Bokashi is a very interesting method that came from Japan. It means organic fermented matter. So as you can imagine, we are going to divide it into 2 steps, right? The first one, we are going to ferment our waste. And it's an aerobic fermentation, meaning that there is no oxygen operating there. And then we are going to do this in a small bucket that fits any kind of kitchens, whether you live in an apartment or if you live in a house, you have space to do that. And then there's a second step, which is called decomposition. And then you're going to mix your fermented waste directly with soil or with dry organic matter. So I'll be like a little bit more deep in that very soon. But first, I want to focus on the first step of Bokashi composting because it's the step that less people know about, okay? So 2 really important things here. Why is Carolina telling us to ferment our waste if we can just directly compost it, right? So there are 2 main reasons for that. There are other really cool advantages that I will cover very soon. But to start with, when you do Bokashi fermentation, the first really cool thing is that you reduce your volume by 25%. And also, Bokashi allows you to storage your waste for up to 2 or 3 months in your house. What does that mean? Is that you're not going to go to the garbage outside to take the trash out all the time, right? I'm not sure if you want to type in the chat how many times you take trash bags out of your house every week. But I can guarantee you that with Bokashi composting, you're only doing this like once a month max. Okay, so you're actually saving a lot of time, and also you're basically reducing the volume of your waste, which is also really cool. The second point that I want to touch here is that Bokashi composting has a double action for the soil. So the first action is that you're obviously having a fermented waste that is full of nutrients, right? But not only it has nutrients, it has a lot of microorganisms that are essential for the soil's health. So you're going to understand very soon, like, what are the microorganisms this girl is talking about? But just keep this in mind for now. Twice a week, every week. So yeah, 3 times a week here. So yeah, people actually take their, thank you for your answers. People actually take their trash many times a week or many times a month, right? And when you have Bokashi composting, you're actually saving time. And as you know, we don't have a lot of time to spare, right? So because of this double action for the soil, Bokashi is really interesting for regenerative agriculture and soil recovery, which is a huge topic now, right? Because we really have, at least here in Portugal, a lot of problems with soil degradation, and we basically need to recover the soil. So how are we doing that? Well, Bokashi could be the answer. If we can make people adopt the method, right? Anyway, going on. So there are other advantages about Bokashi is that you can compose basically everything you have in your kitchen. I'll talk very soon about what you can't compost with Bokashi, but you're going to see that, you know, like all the rules that normally make people confused when it comes to composting, like, oh, should I put lemons, or should I put meat, or can I compost rice? Like, there's so many questions, but when it comes to Bokashi, there's so little things that you cannot compost that it makes it really easier, okay, to follow. So another really cool thing about Bokashi is that the buckets are hermetically closed, which means that there's no way that flies are going to enter it. Like, you're not going to have bad smells or flies in your kitchen at all, because in order to have it, the bucket would be open, right? So the bucket being closed, you're not going to have any kind of bad things around it. And this is one of like the main concerns when I talk about composting with people. Another thing is that you won't need plastic bags to segregate your bio waste, not regular plastic bags or either biodegradable plastic bags. Okay, you're going to save money and resources there as well, because even though plastic bags might be biodegradable, they're still using resources from the nature to be made. And as I said, it's going to save you time. So as you can see, there are only advantages here, but there are a few points that I want to showcase just to make sure that Bokashi is the right choice for you, because my goal here, I always say this, there are like different composting methods, and for each person or each family, there is going to be a method that is more adaptable. Okay, so you always have to take that into account. But Bokashi is super, like, it's super beautiful because you can actually see the perfect cycle, like a circular bio waste management. As I say, you can basically see the waste being fermented, and then you can see like the bokashi leachate coming out of it. You can use it to fertilize your plants, or you can use it to keep your drains and pipes healthy. And then you can either do this in a domestic or in an industrial scale. Okay, and then the final result, as you can see here in this picture here, this is what I call, it's almost like a bokashi cake. It looks like a cake, you know, when you bake a cake and you actually mold it. It really looks like it, right? And then this bokashi cake or fermented bokashi matter is going to regenerate the soil and directly impact microbiota, okay? And then you can grow new vegetables from there. So you can actually see how nature is very smart, and that when we talk about circular economy, the only thing we are doing is actually copying nature. Okay, so just to be honest, every method has good and bad sides, let's say. It all depends on your family, on your house, if you have a garden or not. And just to be very sincere, there are a few downsides to bokashi that for some people are important, and for some people they don't really care about it. So this is for your information. So bokashi needs a second step. Some people don't like it. I really don't mind it. I think it's easier anyway. Another point is that you're going to have to regularly acquire Bokashi BRAN, that I'm going to explain what it is very soon. And then you need, when you use Bokashi in the soil, you're going to take like 2 weeks to be sure that the pH is stable and neutral, okay? But I'm going to explain each of these sides of the Bokashi composting, and then you can decide for yourselves if this is the best match for you. So what do you need for Bokashi composting? Let's get into the practical side. You, of course, need bio-waste, right? And here, just to showcase that, as you can see, my bio-waste is inside a Tupperware, and it's very, very important that you always store your bio-waste correctly in the kitchen. Put it into a Tupperware, no plastic bags needed, but always, always keep the lid closed so you avoid flies, okay? This is very important here. Also, don't keep your bio-waste inside the Tupperware for many days, 2 or 3 days max. If it's very hot, if it's during the summer and the weather is super warm, you might even want to keep your Tupperware inside the fridge. You're going to need soil, right? Because you have to bury your bokashi somewhere. You have to, well, the main goal of the bokashi composting is nourishing the soil, right? And then you're going to need a bin. Well, some people call it a bin. I like calling it a bucket because it's basically a bucket. And the fermentation bucket is really interesting because basically it is, it doesn't matter really like the format of it, but there are some important aspects of it. First, it has to be airtight, meaning that we're doing an aerobic fermentation, right? You don't want oxygen flowing. It has to be something that allows the segregation of the liquid and the solid fractions. In this case here, we have this stainless steel bucket. As you can see, there are like a few holes here in the bottom of it, meaning that all of the solid fraction stays inside of the bucket and the liquid fraction is going to go down and go out from the tap. Okay, so there's a small tap or faucet here. You can choose the word you prefer. Also, the fermentation bucket is small, it's compact. You can find it from like 9 liters to 16 liters, but I know there are companies doing like huge ones with 120 liters, okay? So it really depends on how much waste you generate at home. And then you have Bokashi BRAN. So Bokashi BRAN, basically, the only objective of the Bokashi BRAN is actually being a vector, like something that is going to carry your microorganisms. Because if you put your organic waste inside a completely closed bucket, it's going to rot. So the difference between bokashi fermentation and just rotting waste is that you're going to put a lot of microorganisms there, okay? When we do bokashi, we use normally bokashi brain. So bokashi brain is a lot of cereal residues. In this case here, you can see wheat, and you can also see like this figure here, like it's rice rusk, okay? So this is actually residues that we are using as a resource. And then we are going to inoculate it with EM, which is efficient microorganisms. It's a patented solution from Japan, from the scientists that created bokashi. And then we're going to add sugar, let it fermentate, and dehydrate it for distribution, okay? So really important thing here, you normally want to keep your bokashi brain as protected from oxygen and humidity as you can, because if the air is too humid and your bokashi brain package is open, you're probably going to have it start working and you have a lot of mold before even getting to use it, okay? So the bokashi brain is only supposed to be in contact with humidity when you actually put it inside the bucket for fermentation, right? If you have any questions, you can just type it into the chat. So in your bokashi bucket, you can put a lot of things. As I said, it's really, 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 really important that you actually chop your waste before putting it there. It doesn't mean that you have to like completely process and create like a flour of bio waste, but as the more you chop it, the faster the process goes, okay? So you can use raw scraps, you can use cooked scraps, even here, meat, dairy, pasta, rice, beans, with oil, without oil, it doesn't matter. And you can also put in bread, coffee grounds, tea grounds, and even paper. When I talk here about paper, could be paper filters, paper from the kitchen, you know, and also brown paper bags from shops. The only thing here you cannot really put, and this, like, there are no exceptions. Of course, you're not going to put anything that is not organic, like plastic or metal or straws. Please don't do that. It's not going to work. But also, and this is very important when it comes to bokashi, if you use liquid waste, you're going to clog your tap. Okay, so don't do that. So no yogurt, milk, soup, liquid sauces, anything like that. Then medium to big bones. You can put small bones like chicken bones, but it's like pork bones, just don't use them, okay? Try something else. Anything from your bathroom, oysters, nail shells, because they're not really organic, they're really mineral. So it's better to just throw them back into the ocean in case they're clean. And also, of course, nothing like pills, cigarette butts, even the ones that say biodegradable, because if they have been used, they have a lot of chemicals there, okay? So let's start with a ninja tip. When we start a bokashi bucket from the scratch, the first thing we're going to do is to put kitchen paper there on the bottom. And this is going to prevent clogging, okay? I know it's very hard to follow a workshop online when you cannot actually see it, but just think of this image here. Let me go back. You see this stainless steel bucket. The only thing I'm asking you here is to put one piece of kitchen paper in the bottom. And this is only going to prevent clogging of your tap, okay? So imagine, I'm so sorry I'm not there in Brussels, but well, just imagine that. Then after that, you start putting your bio waste one, okay? So you open the lid, you throw your bio waste. Don't forget to chop it into smaller chunks. Like here, you can see everything like is kind of chopped. There's like orange peels here that are chopped as well. So you just put everything inside and you're going to compress it. when you're going to compress it, you're trying to do like layers that are not very high. So you're going to look for like 2 or 3 fingers layers, okay? And the reason why we're doing that is that we want to make sure that microorganisms can act very fast, so your bio-waste is not going to rot, okay? So put your 2 layers of 2 fingers of bio-waste and compress it. When you compress, you're doing 2 things. The first thing is that you're making sure you're draining the liquid. And the second thing is that you're trying to take as much air as you can from inside the bio-waste, okay? You're going to compress it as much as you can. Then you're going to add your Bokashi BRAN, normally 60 grams, 50 grams per layer. So here, if you remember that I said that you have to do like layers that have 2 fingers, if you have a lot of bio-waste, you're going to do 1 layer, compress, add the Bokashi BRAN, do another layer, compress, and add the Bokashi BRAN, okay? So if you have a lot of waste accumulated, you do a lot of layers. If you only have a little bit of waste, then 1 layer will be enough. And then it's done. So as you can see, you just open the lid, put your bio-waste, compress it, add your Bokashi BRAN, and it's done. So 4 minutes a day, and you keep the landfills away. It's really, really, really easy. So this step is the easiest part, okay? And this is what you're going to do until you fill completely your bucket, okay? Just make sure you're not going to make any mistakes. They normally fall into 3 categories. So oxygen, waste, and BRAN. When it comes to oxygen, it's normally people not being really aware of like closed lids or closed taps. So as you can see, you have 2 ways that oxygen can flow inside your fermentation bucket. The first one is the lid, so you have to really, really close it. And the second one is the faucet or the tap. And a lot of people, when they're draining their Bokashi tea, they get so excited that they forget to close the tap. And then there's oxygen flow and everything rots, okay? Don't forget it. You really have to have like a completely anaerobic environment. When it comes to waste, it's just not forgetting about chopping your bio-waste beforehand, but also not putting bio-waste that is already rotten or completely in decomposition, okay? So you're going to avoid storing the bio-waste for a long time before fermenting it. And then the BRAN, just make sure you buy a good quality BRAN, that it's not expired, and that you're actually storing it correctly, okay, with no contact with air. Then, as you can see, there is something really cool here, that is the Bokashi tea, okay? So when you're compressing your bio-waste, as you're filling your bucket, you're going to have like a humid, like a liquid part coming out from the tap. It's really important that you drain it very frequently, and I would say at least once a week. It's going to depend whether you're using bio-waste that has a lot of humidity in it or not. So for example, potato peels don't really give you a lot of Bokashi tea. Watermelon peels will give you a lot of Bokashi tea, okay? So there's that. And also it might take a while for it to come out. When you are storing your Bokashi tea, you have a great natural organic fertilizer for your soil, which is not only good for the plants, it's also good for the soil, because you have a lot of efficient microorganisms there that are going to regenerate the soil. So don't forget that soil is not only about the chemical nutrients, but it's also about life. If you have a soil without microorganisms, you have a soil that is dead, okay? Also, really cool thing about Bokashi tea is that it helps cleaning drains and pipes. It doesn't unclog it though. You're only going to keep it healthy because as the microorganisms pass through the pipes and the drains, they're going to, let's say, eat or feed from food scraps that might be there, like rice or whatever might be there. So how much does a household of, I would say, 4 people we spend per month on BRAN? So normally we sell, like most companies sell 1 kilogram of BRAN, and with 4 people, it would last like 3 months. Like in my house, it lasts more, but we are 2 people. So it takes me like 5 to 6 months to use a whole kilogram, because you're only going to put a small spoon each time you fill the bucket. You make a layer of the bucket, okay? And then when it comes to dilution, the dilution is 1 to 100, meaning that with 10 milliliters of tea, you're going to have to complete with 1 liter of water, okay? Sure. Important here also is that the Bokashi tea, actually any kind of fertilizer that you're using with plants, don't add it to the leaves, okay, or the stem. Remember that the plants can only absorb nutrients from the roots, and the roots are in the soil, okay? Because of the Bokashi tea being very acidic, the pH is kind of low. So in this case, especially, please don't put it directly over the plant, okay? Just store it correctly. Don't store it for more than 2 weeks in the fridge. Do the right dilution and add it to the soil directly. Oops. Okay, so basically this is the first step, right? So all you need to do is basically just put your waste, layer it, add your BRAN, and you're good to go. After the Bokashi bin is completely full, you're going to wait at least 2 weeks. So 2 to 3 weeks fermentation. And this is the reason why most Bokashi bins come in kits or sets of 2, right? Because as the bin number 1 or the bucket number 1 is going through this 3 to 2 weeks fermentation process, you're going to need a second one, okay? Just make sure it works. Then during this time, you're going to see a partial degradation of the waste, meaning that when you open it, you don't have the fertilizer, right? You still have to go to the second step. And when you go to the second step, you're going to see something like, well, people kind of freak out in this moment. Don't freak out. You're going to see something like this, right? Sometimes you have a lot of white mold here, and this white mold basically is the good mold you want, because there's so many kinds and species of mold, and the Bokashi mold specifically, when everything goes right, you can get a lot of white mold. Although this is not like very common, okay? This is like, this could happen. And if this happens, it's a very good sign. If it doesn't happen, that's okay as well. If it doesn't happen, you're going to have something more like this. As you can see, you can still distinguish bio-waste pieces inside of this Bokashi cake, right? So what is the difference between just like burying your waste directly or burying Bokashi is that here, when you ferment, you reduce the chances of actually the bio-waste generating methane. Okay, so CH4. So what you're going to do now in the second step is deal with this. So this is not very big, as you can see, and there are many, many ways to deal with it. So you're going to have to choose one of 3 options, okay? So the first option is mixing it with soil directly, and this is really good, for example, for whoever has a house or a community garden, or even if you have a box with soil or a big vase in your apartment, you can still deal with it. Other people prefer to add it to the hot compost or even like piles of garden waste. And here it's really cool because Bokashi is going to accelerate the process. And the other option is to use it in warm farms. And this is really cool because worms are not very friendly when it comes to digesting lemon, orange, or meat scraps. But after, like, once the scraps are fermented, they actually can digest them. So this is really cool. It's like pre-treating the waste so the worms can eat them, right? So we're going to go through the 3 options very quickly, and then we'll have a lot of time for questions. So I have divided in the options here, right? So first option, if you have a vase or a box. As you can see here in this picture, I'm mixing a bokashi with soil. And this is normally what I do in my apartment. So in my apartment, I do 2 things. Sometimes I do this one, and other times I give it to my worms. But if you don't have worms, this is a great option for you. The only thing you have to do is have like a big box, probably 40 liters will be enough, right? So you add your bokashi fermented waste here, and you put the double of soil. So this is very important. Like, the proportion here is really important. So you mix it with soil, and you make sure that you still have enough soil to cover with a 5 centimeters layer. And it's really, really, really important, like in this case here, specifically, that you protect it from the rain. Please protect it from the rain. If you don't, in this context of like plastic box, as you don't have any kind of drainage in the bottom, you're going to have bokashi soup, and this is not going to smell good, okay? So far we are doing something that is not smelly. If you do this in a box and you leave the box open for rain, then you have a problem. The other option, if you have a garden or if you have a cool neighbor that has a garden, you can just bury the bokashi completely, okay? Bury it, cover with also more soil, at least 10 centimeters here, because you're going to avoid raccoons, rodents, or any kind of other curious animals, or even cats or dogs, okay? And also for rotating crops, or even like flower beds, or even small community gardens where you're growing vegetables, it's really nice to use this technique to prepare the soil before you actually plant your seedlings or your seeds, okay? It's very important that you wait at least 2 weeks before planting anything here, for the pH to be more neutral. If you don't have, or if you don't want to bury in the soil or mix it with soil in a vase or in a box, you can also add it to community composting sites or even hot compost. Let's say you have a neighbor that has a hot compost bin. You can ask them, so, hey, I have bokashi, can I add it to your bin? It's really cool because it's going to accelerate the process very much. And then you have this argument like, well, if you accept my bokashi, your hot compost is going to perform better. When you do this, it's really important that you keep the proportion of, for each bucket of bokashi fermented waste, you add 2 portions of dried leaves, okay? So it's basically the same thing as you will do if you add fresh bio-waste, okay? It's the same proportion. And if you're going to use it with worm farms, there's just like one thing here that you really have to be careful, because when it comes to worm farms, if you have an indoor worm farm like I do, for example, you don't want to overfeed them, okay? You don't want to put too much bokashi, otherwise it might get very hot in there and they might run away, okay? And as I said, there's a huge advantage here that if you first compost your bio-waste, you probably can feed your worms with it later on. So a lot of people that have worm farms are frustrated, like, oh, but I have a worm farm, and with worm farms, I cannot compost lemon or oranges or pineapples or whatever. But if you first do the bokashi process, then you can actually do it. The proportions are 1:1. So if you put a bucket of bokashi there, you're going to have a bucket of dried matter. And here, that would be a whole other workshop. But here you can use dried leaves, you can use wood dust, you can use cardboard, you can use like egg boxes. Okay, there are a lot of options here. The only thing I would really showcase in the case of using this for worm farms is that you don't use the whole bokashi bucket at once. Okay, so this bokashi bucket here has 16 liters and my worm farm has 60 liters. And still, I try to use like 1/4 or 1/3 of the bokashi fermented matter per week. Okay, I put 1 portion per week and then I just keep this closed and it doesn't rot. I just like very slowly add this to my worm farm so the worms are happy and not overfed and don't have to run away from the worm farm. So it doesn't really matter which of the 3 paths you're going to choose, whether you're going to take it to a community garden or donate your waste, your fermented bokashi waste to organic farms around you, or if you're going to bury it, or if you're going to feed it to worms. It's always good that you wait at least 2 weeks until you have your fertilizer, especially if you're mixing it with soil. Don't forget that if you're mixing it with soil and you have and you are growing vegetables, if you mix it too close to your vegetables at the beginning, it might be too acidic. Okay, so maybe you want to mix it a little bit further, and then you go there and grab that fertilizer after 2 weeks, and then you spread into your crops. So the last tip I have for you guys is when you're doing bokashi composting in an apartment, you can actually reuse the same box for as many cycles as you want. So let's say, and just to make clear, like if you have a box with soil, you don't have to go to the market, or you don't have to go to your neighbor and ask for more soil every month or every 2 months. When you have to do the second step, you can use always the same box with the same soil, because all the bokashi fermented waste is going to become soil after 2 weeks, right? So you have that huge advantage there. So even though you live in an apartment and you need to do this inside a box, you have this option. So this is what I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed the workshop. And now we're taking questions, because I know that bokashi composting is kind of still very new for us and for most people. So if you want to unmute yourselves, or if you want to type in the chat any questions you might have, I'm all ears. I'm going to stop sharing for now so we can see each other, because otherwise I don't see you guys. So any questions, any comments? I hope you have liked it. I know that, how can I say this? Like, online workshops aren't the best way to learn something. But I hope you could have like a rough idea. So you're asking, what are the most common mistakes when starting this method? So the common mistakes that I see basically are not using enough bokashi bran, or not really taking care of your bokashi bran and incorrectly storing it. So storage is really important. Like when it comes to bokashi, it's really important to be aware about the contact with humidity and the contact with oxygen, okay? Because you want to make sure that the first step is as dry and as anaerobic as you can. And some people don't really store the Bokashi brain correctly, and then they have issues because the Bokashi brain starts to get mold, and then it's not going to be as efficient when you use it for the Bokashi process, okay? Another very common mistake is that people try to ferment their waste without chopping it at all. So they put like huge cauliflower stems, and this doesn't work because we have to think, okay, so the microorganisms, for them to be very effective, they have to actually reach the bio-waste as soon as they can. And when we use like very, very big bio-waste pieces, they're going to take so much time to get there, to start fermenting that this is going to rot before they have a chance to fermentate. So this is also another very common mistake that I have seen. Thank you. I'm really glad you liked it and you think it was a clear presentation. I feel like Bokashi is really growing in Europe now, and it has this advantage that for people that have gardens, it's really cool because you can actually accelerate and your garden composting if you have it already, and you're going to like avoid rodents or cockroaches or other plagues that you might have problems with, or even flies. And also you're going to save a lot of space because of the volume reduction. And if you live in an apartment, it's also cool. So I feel like Bokashi is really a nice way for us to rethink the way we are doing at the kitchen bio-waste segregation. So, you know, like not having to use plastic bags, not having to use anything like, you know, like small buckets with carbon filters, and then after 2 days that smells really bad. And then, I don't know, like even for door-to-door bio-waste collection, I really feel that Bokashi would save municipalities and governments a lot of resources and really make the logistics easier if they would think about collecting the bio-waste in the fermented way, because otherwise they have to like pass with their trucks every day. But if you ferment your bio-waste first, you could actually like do the bio-waste door-to-door collection once a week. And it doesn't, like, for people that really don't work with it, maybe it doesn't seem much, but once you start putting it like into an Excel, like how much gas you use, like how many routes and etc., then you're going to see that it's saving not only money, but also saving a lot of carbon emissions for the environment. Have you been having the opportunity to talk about these composting possibilities with companies and or startups? What has been their feedback? Yeah, well, actually, we do know a lot of other composting initiatives, not only in Portugal, but also in Europe and even in Brazil, where I'm from. Even though I'm based in Portugal, I am from Brazil. And I know that, for example, Bokashi has really been growing a lot in Brazil. And I know now like people doing Bokashi in many other countries, such as Peru, Ecuador, also in the US now. And we do have a company that has been working with us for almost a year now, and they are our current suppliers for Bokashi kits. Even though now we have our own Bokashi brand made in Portugal. But yeah, well, you know, they have really good feedback. I feel like Mudatuga has been really, has had like this really good feedback on our trainings, and I cannot really wait for us to have our product in the market so we can get feedback from our product as well. But so far, none, no people has still used this. when it comes to talking with like companies or even municipalities, I feel like some people really believe in Bokashi and some people just don't believe it because it's kind of new to Europe, like new, not super new, but at least in Portugal, it's like a very new subject. So some people are kind of scared, some people don't really understand it, some people don't see the value, but I feel like slowly we're going to get more people interested in the method. And yeah, well, I think I might have answered the question.
Thank you, Carolina, for this very interesting workshop. I have a question, maybe just silly. Where is the perfect place for putting a bokashi bucket? Inside or could be also outside? And what are the advantages?
Yeah, well,
fly free, because we were doing some composting in the office and it was a disaster.
I know, I know it's really common. So a bokashi bean normally stays inside, so it can, as it doesn't need light or air, it can stay inside a cabinet or inside like under the sink or over the sink. It really depends on the size and the aesthetics of it. It can also stay outside, but then if it stays outside, you have to protect it from the sun for two reasons. The first reason is that most bokashi buckets are made from plastic, and I don't know if you have like put plastic outside, but unless it's UV protected plastic, it's going to become very dry, and sometimes it breaks. So there are kinds of plastic that are prepared to be outside in the rain, the sun, but the bokashi buckets I know, they don't have the UV protection that they need. So they're going to eventually break or be degraded by the sun and the rain, okay? Another problem of leaving it outside, especially when there's a lot of sun and it's really hot, is that you might enhance or accelerate the generation of CO2 inside the bucket. And like the bucket's lid has a little bit of a flexibility. And when you have a lot of CO2 being generated inside, it kind of inflates a little bit. But if it inflates too much, it might pop. And if it pops, then you have air flow, you know, so this is another problem. Just to be clear here, it's normal that there is a little bit of CO2 production inside the bucket because of breathing, right? Microorganisms breathe, such as I breathe, and I produce CO2. So this is another thing that people sometimes get worried about.
Okay, so thank you very much. I don't know if there are other questions, but we also share your presentation and your contact. So you might get also by email. So thank you again for this very interesting presentation. And we hope that we will have new Bokashi followers in the next weeks. So thank you, Carolina. So thank you, Carolina, and thank you to the participants.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And if you have any questions, just reach out to Mudatuga. And I know our social media is in Portuguese, but if you need anything in English, just send a message.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, guys.